Hello there, and welcome back to the second part of paging tree with Jetpack Compose tutorial series. In this video I'm going to show you how to create an account on unsplash.com. Then after that you will be introduced with some important Unsplash API guidelines, which you need to follow if you want to implement their API in your Android application. Then after that I'm going to show you how to test one of its endpoints and how to inspect that same endpoint in order to see which exactly information we are going to receive from that endpoint or from that API. And then only after we see what information we are going to receive, only then we can decide which information we actually need for our Android application. And then that information will be used to actually create model classes in our Android Studio, which will be used actually to fetch those information from that same API. And you will see all about that when the time comes. For now, let's get started. Okay, so now I have just opened the official Unsplash developers documentation. And before we start working with our Android Studio project, we need to get introduced with this API documentation. Now the first thing which you need to do, you need to register on their website. And since I have already registered on their website, I'm not going to repeat that step, but you should definitely create an account on their website. After that, we're going to open up this setting up an application documentation. So here it is, and we are going to see what actually we need to establish an API to our Android application. So after you create an account on this unsplash.com, then you need to create a new application there as well. So initially your application which you create here will be in a demo mode, and that application will be limited to 50 different requests per hour. So you will be able to use only 50 requests per hour on this application which you create initially on unsplash.com. However, there is also a solution to apply for a production mode for your application, and then if you apply for a production, then your rate limit will drastically increase. So if you want to create an application on Unsplash, you just click this link named Your Apps, and after that you're going to open up this website. So here you can see that I have created two different applications, and I'm only using this on the left side. And my application is in a demo mode, which means that I'm allowed to use only 50 requests per hour, which is in my case enough because this application is for demonstration purposes only. But you can also apply to this production mode application, which will allow you to use even 5,000 requests per hour. And of course you can do that. You just need to click this link learn more and then just fill in all the necessary information. Now I have already created this application, so if you don't have it, just click this new application button and then fill in those necessary information. Now I'm going to open up this application, and here I can see some more information about it. Now there are specific guidelines which we need to follow if we want to use this API in our Android application. And I'm going to talk about those guidelines in a moment. And down below, if you scroll in your application, then you will see the access key and the secret key. So this access key will be used from your Android application as an API key. So whenever you send a GET request to this Unsplash endpoint, then you will need to include this access key in a header. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. For now, let's just go back to documentation, where we can see all those API guidelines. So now let me just read those guidelines which we need to follow. The first one says that all API users must use the hot linked image URLs returned by the API under the photo.urls properties. This applies to all users of the image and not just the search results. Now, what this guideline actually means? Well, it means that whenever you send a GET request to some of their endpoints, then you will need to use an image URL provided by that same property in that response of that API. So for those of you who are not familiar with hot linked image concepts, let me just open up here one website where we can read more about that. So here it says that hot linking is when a website links to an image that is hosted on an external server. so that the image is embedded into the web page. Now, websites sometimes do this instead of uploading image directly, which means that they do not usually host the image on their server. And down below it says that the largest issue at stake with hot linking is a copyright infringement. Since a hot link directs to another file, no actual copy of the work has been made. And this technicality has created a legal loophole that allows image users to display content they do not own without committing a copyright infringement. So what this hot linking actually means? Well, you already know that Unsplash API is hosting different kind of wallpapers and images on their server, and each one of those images has been uploaded by its original author. So we are not actually allowed to copy those images and use them in our application without its author's permission. However, we can use a hot linked image. And a hot link image means that we can just use that image link, which is provided by this API, and embed that image URL into our Android application directly. So you will see all about that when the time comes. And now let's just read other guidelines. So here the second one says that when your application performs something similar to a download, then you must send a request to that download endpoint returned under the photo links download location property. And don't mind those actual properties of this API response. We are going to inspect that API response a little bit later. So basically this second guideline is telling us that if we actually want to download this image, then we need to use this specific image URL, which is placed inside a photo links download location property. Now more about that guideline a little bit later. Let's just continue reading those guidelines. So the third one says that when displaying a photo from Unsplash, your application must include Unsplash, the Unsplash photographer, and containing a link back to their Unsplash profile. So all links which are referring back to Unsplash user profile should include this UTM parameter or this query, okay? So what this third guideline actually means, it means that we need to include this text in our application. So basically what we need to do with this third guideline, it means that we need to include a text in our application which will say that that specific photo was uploaded by that specific author on an Unsplash website. So basically that means that we need to give credits to each and every person who has uploaded that specific image on unsplash.com. And the final guideline here says that your application's access key and the secret key must remain confidential. Okay, so those were some of the most important guidelines which we are going to follow because we are using that API. Okay, so now that you have created your account on unsplash.com, after you have created your own application here as well, and after you have been introduced with all those guidelines which we developers need to follow, now we can actually try and test one of its endpoints. So let's open up our documentation here. Just select this setting up an application documentation, and down below we are going to scroll until we find this base URL of this Unsplash API. So I'm going to copy this URL. And I'm going to open up a Postman. So if you're not familiar, a Postman is basically just one simple and very useful tool which will allow us to send different HTTP requests to different servers and inspect their response. Now here we are going to paste that base URL and we are going to access one of its main endpoints. So let me just open that website for a moment. Let's go back here, and now from here I'm going to select this list new photos documentation. Okay, so you can see that the actual endpoint for listing basically all images from this Unsplash is /photos. So now we are going to copy this endpoint, and we are going to concatenate that endpoint to our base URL. Okay. Now, from this documentation, you can already see which parameters we can specify on this same endpoint. And there are three different queries which we can use. The first one is a page number, the second query is a per page, which will allow us to specify exactly how many items or images we want to receive per one page. A default value is number 10, and the last parameter or a query is order by, which will allow us to sort our photos. Now in this case I'm going to only use those two first queries, or we actually don't need to add those queries because those two queries have a default parameter. For page it's number 1, and for this second parameter is number 10. So let's just go back here, and I'm not going to pass here anything, just click send button. So now you can see that we have received a response from this Unsplash API. So we have received a 401 HTTP response unauthorized, which means that we cannot request any data from this API without the actual API key. So if you recall, we have already created an account on this Unsplash website. So let's open up that application. And here I'm going to copy this API key or this access key, so we can actually request the data from this API. Now let's go back, and where should we include this access key or this API key? Well, we need to include that in our headers. So whenever we send here a GET request to this specific endpoint, we need to include our access key. Now let's just open up that documentation once more. Let me see which one is it. Okay, so this one. So here from this documentation, I'm going to select this user or public authentication. So click here, and you will see that this is the exact header which we need to include in each and every request we send to this specific endpoint. So we need to write here authorization. Let's just go back to our Postman. So let's write here as a key authorization, and as a value we need to write a client ID. So let me just check that once again. Let's also select this checkbox here. So client /ID space and then our key. So client /ID space our actual API key. So there we go. And now if we try to send a new GET request with this authorization or this API key included, then we are going to receive an actual API response. Now before we get into our Android application, we need to inspect this actual API response. So you can see that this response actually contains 10 different images, and each and every image here contains a lot of information. So let's start with the first one. So each and every image here contains a unique ID. Then we can also see some other information like created date, updated date, the actual width and height, the actual color, blur hash, description, and so on and so on. And I'm not going to explain all those parameters or properties which each and every image object will actually have here. Instead, I'm going to show you which information we are going to need for our Android application. So we are going to need the actual ID. Then down below, as you can see, we have this URLs property, and this URL contains different properties like a row, full, regular, small, and thumb. And each one of those contains a specific link in which we can access the actual image. So for our case, we are going to use this regular size image to actually show that image to our Android application. Now, if you recall, we have already read about those API guidelines, and we have seen that we need to actually use that specific link and just embed that link into our Android application. Now down below we can also see some more information, like for example number of likes, which we are going to use of course. And if we scroll down below a little bit, we are going to see one more important information about the user. Now I have already mentioned before that we are going to need to include a user's name in our Android application so we can give credits. And those user information are available under this property. So you can see that now here we can see the actual profile or a name of our user. We can check its portfolio URL, and we can access its actual profile on unsplash.com. So we are going to need these links and this HTML. We're going to need this username of this user. Then we're going to need our number of likes. So here it is. And we are going to need this actual image ID. And of course the actual image URL. Okay, so now that you have seen how our response will actually look like, whenever we send a GET request to this specific endpoint, now we can open up our Android Studio project and we can start creating some model classes which we are going to use for that data which we are going to receive from this API response. So now let me just open up our Android Studio project. And as you can see here, I have just created one simple Android Studio project by using a compose activity template. And you can basically achieve the same thing by going to a file, then a new project, and by selecting this empty compose activity, okay? Now here I have already included all dependencies and other things which we are going to need for this tutorial series. Now let's first open up our Gradle build files so I can actually show you what kind of dependencies which we are going to have. Now here you can see that I have included 3 different plugins, Kotlin kept, which will be primarily used for our room library. Then we have our Dagger Hilt plugin and Kotlin X serialization, which will be used to actually parse the result of our API response into Unsplash image object, which we are going to create in this video. So next let's scroll down below so I can show you what kind of dependencies which we are going to need here. So here you can see that we have a compose navigation dependency, which we are going to need for navigating between multiple composable screens. Next we have a retrofit library and this Kotlin X serialization converter for retrofit as well. Next we have a Kotlin X serialization. Then we have our room library along with this new implementation called room paging. And this dependency is needed if you want to use a paging with your room library, which we are going to do. Then we have our paging 3.0. We have our Dagger Hilt library and the coil image loading library as well. Now let's open up our second Gradle build file, and here you will see that we are using 2 new class paths for our Dagger Hilt Gradle plugin and for a Kotlin X serialization. Okay, so that's all. I can just close those 2 files for now. Next, I have also created 2 extension properties on a colors class. And those 2 colors will be used for our top app bar, and you will see about that. And also I have included here colors for system bars like status bar and navigation bar as well. So if I run this application right now, then you will see that the color of our status bar and navigation bar will be this purple color. And when we change the theme to a dark theme, then those colors will change to black. So now as you can see, those colors are purple. Let's now switch here the theme. So dark theme, okay. And there we go. So that's how our application looks like so far. Let's just close those 2 files, okay. And I have included 2 resources here as well. One is a heart icon, and the second one is a placeholder image, which we are going to use in our application. Now I have 2 different versions of this placeholder, one which will be used for our dark theme and the other one which will be used for our light theme. Now we can also close those files as well, and finally we can proceed and create the actual model classes to model the actual response from our API. So you already know what kind of information we are going to need for our application. I have already told you that we are going to use this ID. Then down below we are going to use this regular image from this URLs property. Then we are going to use down below number of likes and information about our user or our author of that image as well. And that author is available under the property of the name user. So here we are going to extract its username, and also down below one link named HTML. And that link will lead us to that specific user profile on unsplash.com. Okay, now let's go back to our Android Studio. I'm going to create here a new package named model. And here I'm going to create the first model class. This will be a data class, and I'm going to name that Unsplash image. So this Unsplash image will contain 4 different fields for now. So the first one is the ID. So let's add here the first property, which is the ID of a type of a string, because if you recall from our response here, that ID will contain both characters and numbers. So there you go. Next, we're going to add here a URLs And we are going to also create one new model class for this property. Nevertheless, let's just continue here and add two more properties. The third one will be a number of likes, and the fourth one will be a user. So again, we are going to create a new model class named user. So this Unsplash image model class will also represent a table in our database. That's why I'm going to add here an entity annotation, and I'm going to specify a table name as well. So for the table name, let me just create here a new package named util. And here we're going to create a new Kotlin object named constants, so we can actually place all our constants here. Now our first constant will be named Unsplash image table, and the name will be Unsplash image table. There we go. Now let's just copy that constant right here. Let's just import that. Perfect. And now after that, I'm going to also create two more model classes. The first one will be named URLs, and that model class will be used to actually get that data under the same name, so URLs, okay? And from this model class, we want to get this regular property, which is the image with a regular size. Okay, let's just go back here. I'm going to add one more data class named URLs. And this class will contain only one field, and that is a regular of a type of a string. So we need to add the same name of this variable as the name of that property from our API response. So if you want to add a different variable name for this property, then you can, for example, here add, let's say maybe a regular image. But in that case, you would need to add here a new annotation named the serial name, and then inside that annotation you would need to specify the exact same name of that property which we are going to receive from our API response, and in our case that's a regular. So that's how you can just rename your variables differently, but in that case you would need to add this serial name annotation. Now in my case I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just add the same name as the name of our property in our API response, and the only thing that is left here to do is to add a serializable annotation, so that our Kotlin X serialization library can know that this data class will be used to deserialize our API response. Next model class which I want to create is called user. So there we go. Let's create here a new data class named user. And this class will have actually two different properties. So the first one will be named user links, and I'm going to create a new class for that, so user links, and the second one will be a username. The type will be string. So now let's open up our actual API response so I can show you. Let's scroll down below until we find our user, and this user contains those links. And from those links, we are going to get only one property, which is HTML. So now let's go back. Now here in this case, I am going to add here a serial name annotation, so I can specify the exact property name, which we are going to get from this user links. And that property is name links. So as you can see, that's the same name which we have in our user property, so named links. Okay, now let's go back. We of course need to annotate this class with a serializable annotation as well. And let's create another model class named user links. So another data class, user links, and our user links model class will have only one property, and that is HTML, of a type of a string of course. Let's also add here a serializable annotation, perfect. Now let's go back to our user here, and I'm going to add here one more annotation named embedded, and this annotation is used for our room library to mark a field of an entity to allow nested fields, okay? So because this actual user links is our custom class which we have created, a room library will not know how to store this data in the database, and that's why we need to add this embedded annotation to tell our room library that this model class will contain a nested fields, and that nested field will actually be a string type, which is actually an acceptable type for our room database, okay? And I'm going to do the same thing for our other classes, so let's just copy this embedded annotation and let's just add that here in our URLs and in our user down below. So let me just check again if we have everything we need here for our API response. So we have our Unsplash image, our Unsplash image will contain the actual ID, URLs, number of likes, and the user. Our URLs will contain only one field, and that is a regular image. And our user will contain two different properties, a user links and a username. And our user links also contains one field named HTML. Okay, so I think that now we have everything we need, and we have modeled all necessary parameters or properties which we are going to fetch from our actual API response. Now I think that we can just close all of that. And the only thing that is left here to do is to mark our ID with a primary key annotation. So if we want to create a new table in our room database, then we need to mark at least one field as a primary key. And that's why I'm going to mark this ID as a primary key, because this ID will have a unique value for each and every image we fetch from our API. Now here I'm going to add auto-generate to false. Even though this auto-generate is false by default, I just want to add that value here explicitly, so it can be more understandable. And we are not going to generate here a value for our ID, because that ID is already a unique value from our API response. So now that we have created our model classes, now I'm going to create our Unsplash API interface, in which we are going to define two different GET requests. So let's create here a new package named data, and inside that data package I'm going to add one remote package, and inside that remote package I'm going to create a new Kotlin interface named Unsplash API. So this Unsplash API will contain two different GET requests. So the first GET request will be for our first endpoint to get all images from our Unsplash API, and the second GET request will be for searching a specific image on that same API. So here let's add one suspend function named get all images, and this function will take two parameters. The first one is a page number of a type of integer, and the second one is a per page of a type of integer as well. So you already know that this endpoint called /photos will actually contain three different queries or parameters, from which we are going to add only two, the page number and the per page value as well. So this page query parameter will be passed automatically by our paging tree library, which you are going to see later in this tutorial series. For now, we need to annotate those fields with a query annotation from our retrofit to HTTP library, and here we need to specify one parameter, which is a value. So here we need to specify the exact name of that query, and if you recall, that's actually a page. So let me just open up our web browser. So here you can see that the query name of this parameter is a page, and the second one is a per_page. So we need to add those same names in those query annotations. And down below, let's add one more query with the second query name, which is a per page. Okay, so here now we need to define what HTTP request we want to send and what actual endpoint we want to use. So in this case, we need to add a get annotation to specify a get request, and we need to specify here the actual endpoint, which is /photos. So whenever we send a get request to this endpoint, we need to specify also a return type. So a return type of this get request will be a list of multiple Unsplash images. So Unsplash image, and that's a model class which we have already made, okay? So now we have created our basic getRequest function and its return type. However, that's actually not enough for our getRequest, because we also need to specify the actual API key or access key. So that access key is specified inside a header of our getRequest, and that header is passed with this headers annotation. So just add that headers. And here we need to specify the exact same header name which we need. So if you recall, in our Postman, we have already specified what kind of key and client value we are going to have. So I'm going to copy this whole thing from here. Now let's go back. Here I'm going to type authorization, then a colon, space, client /ID, space and then the actual key. Now I'm going to specify our API key in one file, which will be ignored by our Git versioning system. So whenever I want to upload this project, then that API key will not be uploaded with that repository. So down below I'm going to open up one file. So let me just press here shift 2 times. I'm going to search here for a git ignore file. Okay, so there we go. And here I'm going to add one path, which will not be included whenever we upload this repository on our GitHub. And here I'm going to write Gradle.properties. And now let's open up that Gradle properties file. And here I'm going to add one new property under the name of API key and then the actual API key. Now just click sync now. Now after that, let's open up our Gradle build file. And here I'm going to scroll all the way up until I find a default config. And then here I'm going to add one line of code. So build config field, the type of that field will be a string, the actual key of that value will be API key, and the third parameter is also an API key. So now just sync the project. Now we can close our Gradle build file, our Gradle properties, and our git ignore as well. So from here, now instead of referencing that exact value for our access key, I'm going to just call here a build config class, and then I'm going to access our API key. So if you don't see this API key at the moment, that probably means that we need to rebuild our project. So let's just rebuild our project. And now after you rebuild that project, then you are going to get that variable which we have just created. So just call this API key. Alright. And that's how our first GET request will actually look like. So it will have two queries which we can pass dynamically from our project or from our paging tree library. So paging tree library will handle this page query by itself. And this function is also passing that custom header with that access key. And of course, we are returning here a list of Unsplash images. So the next or the second and final GET request, which I want to declare here, is our GET request for searching all images on that same API. So let's name this function search images. And here the actual endpoint for searching those images is called search/photos. Now this function will also have that same header with access key and also the same query parameters. Okay, so for this video that will be all. Now I have shown you how to create an account on unsplash.com. We have also created the application there as well. I have shown you how to send a simple GET request with that access key included. You have seen what kind of response we are going to get from Unsplash API server, what kind of properties and information we are going to get, and what kind of information we actually need for our Android application. And for those information that we actually need from that API response, we have created different model classes. And the main model class which will be used to store the data from our API response is called the Unsplash image. And also we have created a new interface in our Android Studio project where we have declared two different GET requests. The first one for getting all images from our Unsplash API, and the second one for searching those images on that same API. Now for this video that will be all, and in the next video we are going to continue working on our Android application.
I'm a legend when they